Imagine being an SMB owner thinking all you're going to be doing is, having fun tasks, sitting on the beach or selling jobs, and then your CRM or your ERP breaks. Good luck.
So I was able to sit down and say, like, okay, here's this business. These are the numbers. Like, I have a lot of margin for error here. I think I can figure out how to make this work. I have enough time. Now, like, I had no idea how much work it was going to be, right?
I felt I needed those reps in order to make the next leap in my career. I would never be a good whatever I was going to become down the road unless I got inside of a small business and did all those things I had never done before.
All right, we're here. Sam looks like he's just come back from either a fishing trip or like the what's the waste management
the Phoenix Open.
The Phoenix Open. Yeah, you've got quite the look going.
Kosta, that would imply that we have a fun life and we get to relax and have fun during the work week.
That's true.
Did we get to do any of that this week?
This week has been a marathon where, I mean, it's a good marathon, but we did a team retreat last weekend. So I took the whole, like both the leadership team and the whole company. We got this big Airbnb near Snoqualmie Pass, and it was awesome. It was like introduced a new company mission, vision. We came up with basically what we're calling the Blooma mindset, which is, kind of like core behaviors. And so we'll talk about that in some future episode about like how setting the mission and vision went. But like the team was super bought in and engaged, which is awesome.
That's awesome. How many people did you bring with you?
Like 16.
Holy cow.
Yeah, it was a big Airbnb.
Good for you. So it was essentially like awesome. Almost a full team offsite?
It was a full team offsite, yeah.
Okay,
because the only folks who didn't come are overseas folks. But yes, I had the leadership team come one night early to sort of work on the Blooma mindset, and then I had the rest of the team come the second morning. So it was like Thursday night, then the whole team was there on Friday, and then Saturday was a free day that we could stay. And I also booked it for Saturday night, so some folks stayed through Sunday morning.
Okay, so we'll do an episode on that offsite, and we'll do an episode on overseas talent.
Yes, both are.
So if
crucial.
You came here on this episode number 3 for overseas talent or leadership offsites, you can just delete this epised right now, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
But please follow so you know when it comes.
But please leave us a nice review.
At least we're not wasting people's time. We're letting them know up front that this is not what you're looking for.
Exactly. So before we get into today's topic, which is really all about maybe the attributes of what it takes to be successful in SMB ownership, or, really what's it all about, so you can, both as people pre and post SMB acquisition, let's go into what we talked about before, which is like, what was your week like this week as an owner of a small company?
Yeah. Well, so because I was with the team till Sunday, it kind of just rolled into Monday in a way. So I think like it was great, but I'm also like ready for a real weekend coming up. This week,
and today's Friday, everybody. So we're saying this from the perspective of this is essentially 2 weeks in a row you've been working without a day off.
Correct. But I'm feeling really buoyed by how well the team took the mission vision stuff. Oh, I see the sunglasses are coming off. It's getting serious.
Yeah, serious now.
But in terms of actual stuff I did, you're gonna hate/love this, but we're in the midst of changing out our CRM, and it's totally the right call. Like, this new one is much better, and it allows us to run the business much more effectively. But obviously QuickBooks, the sync broke in every way you can imagine, which it's just
for those of us who that blows your mind, it breaks everything.
It breaks everything. And so we were almost there where like there was a bunch of invoices that didn't sync from the old one. And I was like, okay, we figured out those and we put them all in. And then I was getting ready to close just, 2024 books and January books. And then I realized, well, actually, some of the invoices sync twice. like both from the old CRM and the new CRM. So we're going back in and having to clean those out. So that was sort of like my Tuesday. I was yeah. Anyways, I was a little bit of a
You
pill
didn't wait to
about it.
see if your customers would just pay twice?
Yeah, right. Luckily, it didn't go out twice. It just shows up in our QuickBooks twice. So I had this moment of like, wow, January, good month. And I was like, wait, no, this is not right. Uh,
So when you imagine being an SMB owner, thinking all you're going to be doing is, having fun tasks, sitting on the beach or selling jobs, and then your CRM or your ERP breaks, good luck.
yeah, I think QuickBooks is the software I have spent the most time troubleshooting in over the last
Yeah.
3 years.
All right, real quick because I think it's useful. The what this is day 13 in a row, day 12 in a row, essentially for you feeling like you're working,
Yep.
that is not unusual. For those of us who are new into our small company too, a lot of times you're in the business during the week. So you're sort of necessary to keep the train on the tracks for revenue, operations. You don't actually get to work on the business until nights and weekends. So, not the worst thing in the world if you're going to get into this game to have the expectation that 12 days in a row is going to happen.
Oh yeah, totally.
This is
Um,
entrepreneurship, right?
yeah, no,
ETA.
that's right. How's your week?
Kind of the same, unusual. So industry conference for fencing called Fence Tech in Salt Lake City. So Monday was essentially my only day to sit in the office and get work done.
Hmm.
So, here it is. If you're gonna wipe 2 days, 2.5 days off the calendar, Monday was a grind. Tuesday, 4 a.m. wake up for a 6 a.m. flight. I will tell you, like another secret, 5 hour one-way flights are glorious.
For in what way?
The laptop is open. You can get work done. The phone doesn't ring. The coffee is refilled. It is hyper productive time. So I
So
actually sat on the flight out there thinking, if I really need to, I'm just going to book a flight on a day and just fly because
you
the
know
phone doesn't ring.
you can put your phone on airplane mode. You don't have to literally be on an airplane.
You ever seen that commercial about Captain Obvious? This I know. It's just not so easy.
Yeah. So here's my thing though. I hate working on planes.
Mhm.
I used to fly a lot, right? When I worked in PE, like I remember I think it was 2017 or 2018, I did 75 flights that year. Um
Holy
and that
cow.
was my small act of rebellion is I just did not work on flights. And I would actually
That
this is the pro tip for any like junior PE analysts that are listening to this thinking about, doing ET in the future. Pro tip while you're still in PE is you ask your boss's assistant for the seat number and then you make sure your seat number is behind them so so they can't watch you.
Oh man. See, look,
Um,
tactical content. That's why we're
tactical
here.
content, exactly.
All
Um,
right, so one more thing, everybody who's out there who has yet to buy and run a small business, there are perks. So one of those is in my entire life, I never had access to those airport lounges, but now we have a credit card and it gets us into an airport lounge and it's fantastic. So there are pros to this, right?
That's funny. I agree with that. I hate airport lounges also. So we just disagree.
How many
Like
flights
I
did you
would
take in one year? 75, you just said?
yeah,
That's why
exactly.
you hate them.
I think I just got old, but like I would rather go eat at Jimmy John's at the airport than like, like go to the buffet at the lounge and like pick out 4 cubes of cheese. I don't know. I That's just the trade. I like that more now.
See, you guys, it's Friday afternoon when we're recording this. We're tired. Our hairlines are struggling, and and
So
we're
listen,
quick
hey,
to.
it's 7:30 a.m. for me. So we're you're getting like fresh. This is my only energy I have for the day. So you're getting all of
Okay,
it. Yeah,
awesome. We're getting our best work in the morning.
good.
All right, our producer Johnny is going to say, "Guys, get your shit together. Start
This is
talking about
true.
your topic." So,
This is true. But before we dive in, one quick thought is if you have ideas for us on what we should talk about, things you want us to talk about, if you have anecdotes you want to share that we can anonymize for you, please do reach out. You can, DM either of us on Twitter. That's probably the easiest way,
Yep.
or LinkedIn. But yeah, we're all ears. We'd love to hear kind of stories or ideas that you guys have. So today's topic is who can be successful in SMB ownership. We want to talk about kind of attributes, the what mindset you come into it with, and generally we'll just have a conversation about that. I wanted to dive in with talking about the moment before you signed your first deal, like the moment you're about to sign. Like, do you remember like how that felt? Like sort of like, oh, I'm actually going to take this leap into being a SMB owner.
Yes, I do. Maybe for you and I, a little bit different in that we've closed deals before, right?
Hmm.
So the idea that the closing was slightly anticlimactic, we didn't go to some lawyer's office and like walk around the table signing documents. We didn't go out to eat afterwards. It was all electronic and very anticlimactic. That's normal. We probably knew that was
Yeah.
coming. What's not normal or what causes it to be really memorable is the overwhelm from the responsibility of what we just signed up to do, because it was a huge pivot in my career and life to do this. And so I definitely felt that heaviness. What about you?
And it's just, did you feel it like that day, or did it like that weekend, or when did it like hit you?
So may have probably made every mistake in the book until the next one I'm going to make, but
Right.
closed on a Friday. And I think now I probably, as an owner operator, it worked. We were able to, we knew the team, which is probably a huge part of it. I knew
Hmm.
everybody in the business.
Wow.
If I hadn't, I think that's a mistake, because if you don't have a chance to control the messaging, speak to the team, they have what, 48 hours to go home and stew on it. And I think that's a big risk. So,
Yep.
if I were to do it all over again, I'd probably do it like on a Monday, or maybe close on a Friday, but not really go announce it until Monday. And that way it just feels less risky. But yeah,
Right.
super memorable
Well,
just because of
speaking of, we closed on a like Thursday night into Friday, but we didn't announce it until Tuesday.
smart. So did
Yeah.
they know you? Did the team know you?
No.
So you were this brand new person that walked in on Tuesday?
Well, on Friday, I was just with the seller, and he just sort of like drove me around. We were doing office stuff mostly.
Yeah.
Same on Monday. So we told the one office staff person, I think, the day prior.
Yeah.
But then on actually maybe it was Monday, we told everyone. But we basically, the former owner, told everyone to meet for pizza after work, and so we all met at a pizza place near the yard. And I had this whole like I had created a script for the former owner to use, which he was already kind of like, do we really need a script? And I was like, I was trying to control it.
Yeah.
And he starts with like, hi everyone, like, so I've actually decided to sell the business and retire. This is Kaustubh, the new owner. I'll hand it over to him.
And then you get that lump in your throat. You're like, oh
Uh-oh.
no.
Yeah. Um, the team was super gracious and really welcoming, so that all went well. But for me, that was the day that I was preparing. Like the deal had already closed, but now I was preparing to tell the whole team who I am. Like I remember I called Chase Murdoch that morning, be like, "Hey, this is happening today. Like, what do you think?" And he actually gave me this really good tactical tip, which we should mention here, which is he was like, "Everything you're planning to say, write it on a one pager that you can give out, right? That includes your contact details. It includes your email. It includes like the words like your pay is not changing, your benefits are not changing, like all that important stuff."
Oh, that's super smart.
Super smart, right? And so then when I started talking, I said, I'm going to tell you about what's happening, but just so you don't have to write it all down. I have a piece of paper for you that'll sort of summarize it all. So you can take that home. And if you have questions, you can come back to me the next day. And it's just like, oh, even like that type of little tactical tip just took the pressure off of that so much.
God, that's such a great idea. Isn't it funny? Like you can do 25 deals and then something as obvious as that.
Yeah,
It's
that's all.
amazing.
So that's Chase. That's Chase Murdoch. Um, but but yeah. Anyways, I want to. So like, let's dig into sort of like what made you feel like you were ready to take on the responsibility, right? Because I think that's sort of what I'm curious to learn about is when we talk about who can be successful in SMB ownership, I feel like there's almost the opposite of imposter syndrome happening, right? Where it's like it requires so much hubris and just sort of self-confidence and like arguably overconfidence to dive into this role where neither of us had any background, any industry experience. So like what I want to understand is like how did that leap actually happen?
Yeah. So mentally, I think you and I come to ETA, to SMB ownership from, call it the investor advisor side.
Mhm.
And so in big law and in private equity, we refer to the people who run the day to day, who do the heavy lifting as the operators. And I
Correct.
had never operated anything. We talked about this before, right? Like
Same.
our
Yep.
complete lack of management experience in any respect. I
Correct.
had never opened and started any version of QuickBooks, a CRM, any kind of, operational software, nothing. So in hindsight, looking back, like we are crazy to do this. And so I think if it wasn't for the fact that one, I I was so burned out from my prior job and in a way like had kind of failed down that professional path that I thought would be my career,
Hmm.
that taking this enormous pivot leap into entrepreneurship and operations, like, you know what? It felt like such a change. Well, then it wasn't really a big surprise that I was going to be foreign to everything required. Um,
Hmm.
that, and I think it's not right because at the end of the day, people who run a business, the operators, whoever that is in a small business, that's how the magic happens. That's who makes the magic happen. And I felt like at that point in my career, I think I was around 30. I felt I needed those reps in order to make the next leap in my career. I would
Hmm.
never be a good whatever I was going to become down the road unless I got inside of a small business and did all those things I had never done before. So
Hmm.
that's at least how I felt going into it. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing I remember is I got some advice at the time before I had bought the business, from the CEO of one of our portfolio companies. Because when he heard I was leaving to go do this, he very graciously like met me for he more like asked me to come get coffee with him and
That's
talk to
cool.
me. And like he was great. I mean, he was running a 3,000 person organization, like 900 million of EBITDA, like a big business. So it was super, super nice of him. Um, and what he said to me was, "Look, if you buy a business with less than 10 million in revenue, the owner's responsibility is like by far and away to generate revenue. And generating revenue is industry specific." And so his point was what he advised me to do, which I then ignored because I was who I am. But
Because we're those
yeah,
egotistical entrepreneurs that think we're smarter than
exactly.
everybody.
But
Yeah,
it was
that's
very
why we
good
did this.
advice. It was great advice, right? His advice was, "Hey, just go work at one of the PE firm's portfolio companies and do rotations through the different departments. Go through the finance department, go to the HR group, go to the marketing group." And like those elements in a bigger business, which is, what we had in our PE firm, like those sort of taste like chicken, right? They're kind of the same
Yeah,
across industries. It's
yeah.
the revenue generation. That's the core thing that's really different industry to industry. So he said you should go learn how to do those. Once you're good at that, then pick an industry that you're going to get good at revenue generation in, and then go run that, which is great advice.
It's
But
incredible. Incredible
yeah,
advice. And
yeah,
frankly, now that you and I have seen a lot of peers and friends buy small businesses, it's the ones where revenue generation becomes a problem after closing that is by far and away the biggest issue.
100%. Um, so that was sort of in the back of my head, I think, as I was getting into this.
Yeah.
But for me, coming from more of the financial background, I found a lot of solace and sort of comfort in the numbers, right? I'm a pretty like an analytical type of person.
You don't say.
That's the logic that works for my brain. So I was able to sit down and say like, okay, here's this business. These are the numbers. Like I have a lot of margin for error here. Um, I think I can figure out how to make this work. I have enough time. Now, like I had no idea how much work it was going to be, right? But luckily there was enough margin for error and like we're still not out of the woods by any means, but like I have used up all that margin for errors as I've gone, right? I've needed it. And so part of what stresses me out actually when I talk to searchers today, when as like a potential investor or just, as an advisor, is if I don't feel like they have a real handle on the numbers,
Mm.
because I I don't think sometimes folks will appreciate how much margin of error you need, right, in order to be successful. So, like, as much as we can talk about the attributes of success as of a small business owner, there's also just like setting yourself up for success, right? Like creating a deal structure that actually allows you to make mistakes and fumble and go through the J curve. Um, that's where like if you close with like 1.2 times DSCR, like you have no margin for error. You got to execute day one and execute really well.
Let's go into that a little bit. When
Yeah,
you say have a handle or have your arms around the numbers, what do you actually mean? Because most of us, I think, who go into this don't have a background in accounting, finance, banking, private equity. So what is the threshold? Because maybe some of the best operators don't come from a financial background.
totally. I I think what is misleading, or I think like a misconception that some folks have is like, I'm not a finance guy, so I'll just hire a bookkeeper for that part.
Exactly.
Right? And that like when we were in PE, we used to talk about the idea that there are two types of CFOs. There's kind of the accountant CFO, and then there's the strategic CFO, right? So like as the CEO of a small business, as the owner of a small business, you don't get a CFO, obviously, right? It's just you. Like what you can do is you can split up the accountant CFO role to a bookkeeper, but you need to retain the strategic CFO part, right? And what I mean by that is you need to have an understanding of your financials insofar as it informs your strategy, right? Like you need to understand like, hey, like if I go down this growth path, like there is a certain amount of working capital burn, right? Otherwise you're going to run out of cash as you grow. Or, like, hey, like if I do this round of raises or bonuses or whatever, right? Like this is the strategic choice I need to make about my prices, right? If you can't quite make those connections around how your business model works, like that's gonna be hard, right? Which is totally different from understanding like what class every line item needs to be in on the P&L. That's accounting, right? That's not strategic finance.
Maybe further too is you have an unbelievable KPI dashboard of both like leading and trailing KPIs and how they lead to full set of financials.
It's better now.
I
Next investor update you get, you'll see a better one.
really
Yeah, I'm excited.
okay. So the problem is maybe 1 out of 10 searchers. What I'll ask a question that's common that I like to ask is, okay, I understand that you're not in the business yet, right? You're trying to buy it, you're under LOI. But do you have a sense for the leading KPIs that you're going to track? Like, what is your KPI dashboard going to be on day one? And I
Mhm.
remember that on that first acquisition we did, remember I say we because I bought it with my brother. And it was
Right.
actually him that came up with the idea that we knew so little about that business, but there were certain things that we thought drove revenue and margin every day, and they were just activities. And so we literally had this Google sheet that we would pull up at the end of every day, and we would manually go grab the number. It was a dumpster rental business, so we would go track the number of rentals ordered. We would track things like how many of those were from new customers or what they were just like the same customer calling to get it dumped out and brought back. And so, and then things like what was our PPC spend for the day?
Right.
And what I had no idea that creating KPIs in a dashboard that we manually tracked was a thing. And
Mhm.
now I look at so many of the searchers going and doing this for the first time. They have no idea. Like I had no idea. Um, I wish we could teach more of that. We could give people more of a playbook that worked for SMB, but anyway,
It's tough. I mean, that's what I spoke about right last year at SM
Yep.
Bash, and
Yeah.
I'll do
No
it
free
again this
ads.
year. No free ads. Sorry. Well, it's your thing. I can advertise it if I want.
I
um,
was messing.
yeah,
Yes, lots of free ads.
yeah, exactly. But
Go to www.smbash.com.
but the thing that I think about with when I came into the business on day one, I had no way of telling if things are going well, right? Like that's the core issue I had, which to your point, right? Like there's certain activities that are happening in the business that are leading the P&L. Um, and so again, going back to like who can be successful, like if you can start to just start tracking anything, right? And then you'll start to figure out, hey, this is what's actually correlated to success on the financials, right? Like revenue to me is the long down the road output, right? Like way before that is lead generation or meetings or closings or whatever. Um, and so if you can actually build that out, I mean, in the same way, like one of the benefits of a small business is because it's so small, you can actually do it in a pretty janky way,
Yeah.
right? Like, same as you, like I started every week, I counted on Google Calendar, like with my finger, I counted how many estimate appointments we had for that week. And I just counted that every week. I have that for 3 years now.
And so the problem though is it somewhere between like sort of my age group and maybe 5 years younger than your age group, we all now want to like buy a software system to do this for us. And
Right.
I almost encourage people who are new to running a business, like don't try to outsource to software all these things unless the business already does that. In fact, it might be better for you and the business to do all of this thinking and tracking manually. And you can do this before you close. Like having a conversation about with a seller about these things, like key performance indicators, drivers of ultimate revenue. That's a conversation sellers love to have
Hmm.
instead of like, hey, we're trying to ask you about schedule 4.A2, litigation matters. Like they don't
Exactly.
want to talk about that. They want to talk about their business.
So actually, when I was at Bain, that we used to do these case interviews, and not the consulting stuff, not Bain and Company, but Bain Capital. Like they were more investment case.
Yeah.
And the case interview I would always give, you know, younger folks was around a hotel, and it would basically be like, okay, like let's say you have to buy a hotel, like let's start with revenue. Like, what are the drivers of revenue, right? And I was always astounded where almost every single candidate could always say, okay, well, like your nightly room rate, right? That's a key driver. And your occupancy. That's like or sorry, let me clarify. The number of rooms you book is a key driver. Like for some reason, very few candidates could ever quite connect the dots to like how many nights do we have available as a hotel? So what is our occupancy rate? Like I almost never heard occupancy because that's the actual driver is of how many rooms are booked in a year is your occupancy. So there's some strange things like that where the better you can get at sort of that first principles, like thinking and breaking down a business to what actually drives it, that will help you sort of run your business.
Right. And to be clear, almost none of us who buy a small business were experts in that industry before we got into it. So that first
Absolutely.
principles thinking just kind of level sets you and makes you a more capable buyer.
Yeah, to me like understanding the key drivers of a business is an exercise in curiosity,
Yeah.
right? More, it's not like obviously as you get experience, you learn what really matters or what matters in a more nuanced ways. But like the core of my business, the core drivers have not changed from before I bought the business to now, right? Those are still the same and they are pretty simple to understand. Actually managing them is really difficult, but understanding them can be done before closing.
Right. And so these things, I'll just use you as an example. I knew you before you bought Blooma. I knew you didn't have any experience in tree care. So I knew, or my belief in you had far less to do with industry experience. So that's
Right.
right. Going back to like what is required, what are the attributes? While it is a really nice to have thing where the searcher, the future owner, has actual tangible experience in the industry, I see that so rarely that it's not even on my radar anymore.
Hmm.
And
I mean, it's a good
Frank,
question. The like kind of general issue of like white collar professionals moving into blue collar companies. Like, what are you looking for in that? Like, when you meet someone, what like you're not looking at industry experience. So, what are you looking for in a searcher?
so there are a few words like attributes that people will fling out, things like grittiness. And I think that's great, but like, what is that? And I think about it more as no matter where you come from, are you willing to get your personal day-to-day involvement in the lowest levels, the most fundamental levels of the business, the actual delivery of the service or product that the business does? Are you actually willing to go in there and sit with your bookkeeper, on the closing date to create your opening balance sheet and own that process? Are you another one that I look at is remember all these are through bad experiences. Are you the seller willing to go into your warehouse and count inventory the week of close, like help before close, day of close? Because you may think you know that business, but if you've never counted the product that you do, that whatever that is, you don't fundamentally understand it. And that experience of counting can be incredibly valuable.
Hmm.
So I think and it's not, I'm not saying it's the only way. In fact, I think it's probably a limitation, but I really try to solve for people willing to sort of come down from the pedestal they came from. Because generally, you came from investor, right? Where you supported the group that owned businesses. And to come into the business and be humble, be curious, maybe that's one, right?
Right.
Curious enough to care and learn about all of these different components of the business, uh, care about the people at every level who are responsible for keeping the train on the tracks every day. I think that's what I'm trying to solve for. So it very little, if anything, to do with industry fit.
And what's interesting about that, right, is that filter, there's no like single archetype of searcher that could meet that filter, right? Like it's not gender based, it's not industry based, it's not anything else, right? It's like it's just a mentality, right, or a style of
Right.
thinking almost.
Right.
Um, it reminds me of I'm reading this book right now. There's gonna be another Alex Bridgman shout out. He's just gonna keep getting shout outs, but Alex
No free ads.
yeah, no free ads. Alex referred me to read this book called "Turn the Ship Around," which is about. It's written by a Navy sub commander and about how he kind of changed leadership style on his sub. Um, and one of the thoughts that he said is like, when you're asking questions of your crew, are you asking so that you can understand, or are you asking to make sure they understand? Right. And like a leader who does not is not like truly curious. They're just trying to make sure that that person knows what they're doing. They're not trying to learn it themselves. Whereas I think like for out like this specific brand of entrepreneurship, like you need to go in with the mentality of like you need to understand this stuff yourself. You need to really learn it and figure out what's happening. Actually, I don't know if I told you this, but I'm 2 months away. I have to take my certified arborist test.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
we'll see if I
exciting. You're going to
pass.
get
Yeah,
licensed.
yeah. We'll see if I will pass or not. I got to set some time to study. But yeah, like to me, that is a big part of this. Is like or do you have that sort of driving curiosity and combined with like some level of humility of like, hey, like you know less than everyone else at your new company, right? And so you're the owner, but like like to me, being a good learner is by far one of the most important skills you could or like attributes you could have.
Right. The problem is it's counter to the idea of staying on the business as opposed to in the business that people talk about a lot.
Yeah.
And I think my preference is I would fundamentally rather a searcher go into the grainiest of details, the depths of the corners of their business and get in tune with it for a year or two, because only then can you truly run and grow from a position of strength. And it's
Hmm.
the people that and I say that I oftentimes feel like a huge hypocrite because in the business that I'm involved in day to day, that's not my involvement level. And so, um, yeah, like waving the flag here in that I feel like a huge hypocrite. Um, I think I couldn't be more thankful for having done that when I first bought a small business.
Mhm. Well, I mean, it's a function of size and experience, right? Like, your current
Yeah.
deal is much larger and you have much more experience, right? So
Yeah.
just it's a different challenge.
Right. And maybe that's another thing too is a lot of times I will try to see, does the searcher come from a background where they would manage managers? They would manage managers or other white collar professionals, and
Mhm.
that is their management experience versus did the searcher come from somebody where they were involved in customer relationships or sales or leading the staff? Because depending on the business you buy, particularly when it's small, all businesses, when small, you have to get more involved in those tiny details. But
Mhm.
especially small blue collar service businesses, you especially have to be comfortable with that. So maybe that's a bit of it is like the background, n- irrespective of industry, like the background of the size of business that they were involved in or the type of people they managed relative to the
Right.
business they're getting into.
And to change gears a little bit, I'm curious, like, how do you think about, the type of person who's going into this is generally pretty high ambition. And in like white collar industries, that usually tends to correlate with being perfectionist also.
Ugh.
And I mean, I'll not to lead the witness, but like I think of this like being a small business owner, like perfectionism was going to just paralyze you. And so I'm curious, like how you've either managed, I don't know how if you identify as a perfectionist or not, or how you've seen other searchers kind of manage perfectionism in a, in a asset size, like a business size that is just so fundamentally not perfect.
Yeah, it's a huge problem, right? So uh, I think it has held me back for a long time being a perfectionist. But you're taught to be a perfectionist when you become a lawyer, right?
Right.
So I knew when I spun out of being a lawyer, I'd have to let that go. What does that really mean? You'll see it early on when you go out to search to buy a small business. Forget operating one with imperfect information. You have to buy one, you have to bid on one with highly imperfect information or no information and getting
Hmm.
used to doing that. I think another one is getting used to having speed. Like speed can win in both buying and running a small business.
Hmm.
And I think what got me comfortable is I saw enough people, both when I was a lawyer, seeing entrepreneurs who sold their business and we would help them, and sellers who, I would look at buying their business. Um, you look at them and like they were so comfortable making fast decisions with like such limited information. I also recognize too, they have so much experience in their business and in their industry. Like the lack of visible information to them, like they can get past that, right? Like their instincts are better than ours are.
Right.
Um, but you see all the time searchers who are like constantly waiting for the broker to send them perfect, like a working capital analysis. Well, that's never coming.
Right.
So if you can't get past that, you should really think about whether you're going to be okay bidding jobs as a small business owner where like, you know, you don't ever have good information.
No, I think that's the making decisions off of limited information is probably the most applicable version of fighting perfectionism, right? Like the interesting thing when I was an investor is taking risk was part of our job, right? Like our job was to take risk for the people who give us money. And but our core, like for us to deliver value, we had to return, we had to generate returns in excess of the risk we took. Right. And so like I've been sort of hardwired trained in this idea of like every decision has a certain amount of fundamental risk or intrinsic risk. And the return on that, it's a good investment if the return exceeds that risk. Right. And like that thought process, I think, is like a big part of how I think about any decisions in my business, right? Like, I just am never going to make a slam dunk decision. It's just not part of the deal.
And even if you do, it means that you went too slow. And but that's the whole point. Like at a certain point, you
Yep.
want to grow the business, grow revenue and earnings, team,
Yep.
everything. And there's just not enough time in the day, which is maybe our last point on this question. If you come into a small business, truly small, you're going to wear a lot of hats, have a lot of roles. And if you cannot move on to the next task until it is buttoned up and 100% complete, you'll end up working 100 hours a week and burn out so fast.
Yep. Yeah, the good enough is the real question, right?
Right.
Um, and I'm curious, like, so the flip side of this, right, is who cannot be successful as a small business owner, um, in terms of just inverting the original question. Are there certain attributes, certain types of searchers you've seen where you're just like, hey, like this might just not be the path for you?
Yeah, this is might as well talk about the hard too, right? Because this is
Yeah.
entrepreneurship and it's not for everybody. So, you hear all these buzzwords like self-starter and, whatnot when you're working a corporate job. But when you're searching and running, there is nobody else to backstop you, right? Like, I guess there's
Yep.
the bank and your investors potentially, but they're not the ones, that's not who the buck stops with. So I think what you can't be as an owner is passive
Mm.
or non-committal. I've seen some folks struggle when, for instance, they'll oftentimes look to the bank or to investors to kind of tell them, should I do this acquisition? Like it, you cannot be a successful entrepreneur unless you can ultimately come to conviction and move and lead on your own. That's your job, is to move and lead others, your customers, your team. Everyone is looking and relying on you. And so I don't know what is the word or what is the description of what I'm trying to say. You're better with words than I ever have been.
Yeah, I'm wanting to just say like they're willing to take ownership, right? Which
Okay.
is feels kind of obvious, but like it's not like having responsibility and being taking ownership is not pleasant for the most part, right?
No.
You and so yeah, I don't know, maybe it feels like too obvious to say it that way, but yeah, I mean, so this is loosely connected, but one of the new sort of Blooma mindset statements that we launched last week with our team is, part of like kind of how do we show up to work every day? And they're all I statements. And so one of them is I own our safety because everyone deserves to go home every time. Right. And one of the guys on our team, he articulated this point that I thought was really good, which was that he said, like, when you say I own our safety, right? The word own is in there, like it's actually a lot of responsibility, right? Like on that individual, where suddenly this goes away from like we are safe or like we practice best safety, whatever, right? Like it's transferred to like that individual, like they both have power and then they have real responsibility to basically ensure safety for themselves and their team. And like this guy on our team was like, hey, I feel that, right? Like I feel like, oh my gosh, like that's on me now. And it's like, yeah, that's what we're going for here. Um, I
It's
don't
not
know. I
easy
don't.
to do to
I
create
lost my
that.
point.
No,
Yeah.
no, no. Your point is also that having ownership broadly is kind of what we're looking for is you can't be somebody who is unsure, unconvicted. Like you have to be a leader here. That doesn't mean you need to be like a desk pounding, yelling type of leader, the kind maybe
No.
we thought about by watching movies and TV. Like you can be a quiet, reserved leader, but you have to do it in a way with conviction where people do want to follow you and the mission that you have created.
Yeah. I mean, one of the phrases we used to use in investing was, strong conviction loosely held,
Yeah, of
which I'm sure you've heard that. But
course.
I mean, the idea being, right, like when you've made the decision, you just gotta like act with conviction, move forward. the loosely held part is being willing to be wrong, right? Like if
100%.
new information presents itself, you need to be able to change your mind. And I think that's the secondary part where like the like pound the table, like kind of stereotypical hard leader, the part of that stereotype is like they're unwilling to change, right? Or change their mind or be told they're wrong by their team. And so I think that's like the secondary part of acting with conviction is also being willing to take feedback, be willing to learn from mistakes, be willing to call your own mistakes when they happen,
Yep.
um, constantly.
How about another one, which is we talked about this before when you were in private equity, like your task list was just something you got through completely every day.
Hmm.
And relatedly, I guess I struggle with the idea that there's a task list every day, but there are some priorities there and there are some non-priorities.
Right.
And sometimes it's easier to like, whatever it is, go to your inbox and like tick off the lower level tasks because it feels good. You get them off your plate. But when you become a small business owner, especially if start having spouse, kids, other commitments, you there is not enough time ever to do everything. And so a huge one for me was learning how to prioritize, truly identify the key things that need to get done today, this week, this month, this quarter, and go to war for those key priorities. And if that means like you drop the ball on some of the lower level things, and maybe you learn to like delegate or else something so they don't truly drop. That was a huge one for me. And so I see that now. If somebody needs to be like very neat and tidy about all their tasks and
Hmm.
they care very deeply about their investor presentation being very pretty and well formatted, sometimes I worry that they are going to struggle when the tidal wave of tasks hits them that first week and month.
No, I mean, the one that I kept on my plate for way too long, literally like a little over 2 years, the first 2 years of running the business, 2.5 years, I did all the bookkeeping myself. Which
I laugh.
like
I did the same thing.
yeah, of course. And like for me, part of that was like, hey, this is something I'm good at. Like it's not I could just do it. It like you're doing so much stuff every day that you don't feel very good about or very confident in. It felt really nice to be able to go back and be like, okay, I can make a balance sheet balance, right? Like I know how to do that. Um, it's just not a good use of my time,
It's
right?
not. And because if what you're forgoing is learning how to generate revenue or
Totally.
learning how to recruit the people that generate revenue, if your goal was to stay the size you are today for a long time, maybe, but
Yeah.
you know,
No, and the related point there is I forget somebody was telling me about this. I think maybe it's like a Peter Thiel comment or so, I forget who said this, but like the extreme version of what you're talking about with prioritization is like there's only one thing. Right. And like, so that's the extreme version of business ownership or leadership is like at any given moment, the owner or the CEO, they should only be working on one thing. And like that, they have to identify what is the one thing that is the bottleneck in their business. And that's it. Right. Like everything else that's on their list has to fall off the list until that one thing is resolved. I'm not anywhere close to that. I'm kind of like, I've got like 13 things, but like in theory, like the mindset of that is really interesting.
all right, so let's go there because this is interesting.
Yeah.
Um, let's also realize when we go and buy a small business, generally these businesses are people constrained and capital constrained. To your point about like 1.2 DSCR, like what that means in plain English is you have very little excess cash, if any, over your debt service over the course of a year. And cash flow is not constant, right? It swings. So at any given time, like you don't have extra money, right?
Hmm.
So and kind of for that reason, you can't hire always all of the talent you need to pull yourself out of being the bottlenecks, the 13 bottlenecks. But I think that's why getting involved in every nook and cranny of a small business is so important, is because then a year or two later, in your case, 3 now, I think you can probably identify, if you weren't capital constrained, where those bottlenecks are and maybe be in a position to say, this is how we eliminate that bottleneck.
Totally. I mean, the obvious one, like I can think right off the top of my head, right? Like we need some sort of fleet manager mechanic type of person. We do not have the P&L for that, but that is a bottleneck in our business that are like first it was me managing it, now our operations manager manages it. But
Yeah.
it's a huge like time suck for us that gets us away from building, but is crucially important to the crews and like our service delivery. And like there are people that will be better suited to do that than me or our operations manager because they are actual either mechanics or know how to work on the trucks themselves. But like I don't have the capital or the P&L room for that right now. So there's some of that stuff for sure. Um, but yeah, the challenge of I mean, the other one that comes to mind for me is like our SEO actually, like digital and all of the marketing front where first 2 years or first year and a half, I delegated it all to agencies because I just did not have the time for it. It
Yeah.
became increasingly clear to me, like, oh, this is our like our lifeline, right? Like lead generation is how we exist. And so then over time, I actually took it back to myself. And so like the last sort of year or so, year and a half, I've been doing that all by myself. And now I'm again starting to find agencies for it because now I actually know how to hold them accountable, right? And like I know what the right metrics are. Before it was just like, okay, like do your best, guys. Like I don't know, um,
Yeah, you're
and
kind of in a position to get taken advantage of, or maybe not taken advantage of,
totally,
but like there's no way to test them against baseline.
exactly. Whereas like now I feel like I actually know what good is, and so when I delegate this out again, and I can actually hold them accountable to that.
All right. So what is, you say you've got you are a lot of the bottlenecks, but if you had to choose one single priority or role in the business for you, what is it? Maybe longer term.
Longer term, I think the number one thing I could do is to be like a business ambassador to arborists in the area to build a hiring funnel, right? I think that like I feel like we are building a better tree care business from like a culture standpoint
Yeah.
than the vast majority of the industry, whether it's in Seattle or across the country.
Yeah.
And so and like over time we will get more and more people constrained, right? Right now we're both people and capital constrained. Over time, capital constraint will get easier
Yep.
and then people constraint will be the issue. And so when that's the issue, that's what I should be focused on is like going out and like telling our message of like why you should come work at Blooma.
But the 3 years you've had under your belt now to learn every part of your business is going to allow you to be such a better recruiter, ambassador,
Yep.
trainer, leader, mentor, which
Well,
is
also
the unlock.
I also just believe it now,
Yeah.
right? Like I
Yeah.
spent 3 years trying to build this business in a bunch of different ways, and I mean, I talk about this with the guys. Like one of the ways I did that is I met a bunch of other tree company owners, right? I went and reached out to them. I talked to them across the country, and so I've tried to get an idea of what is best practice, what is best in class, and now I finally have like opinions on that, right? It took me 3 years to actually have opinions on what is best in class and like setting our own standard for what is good and what is great.
Yeah.
Um, and so like I can actually like we needed to define our own standard as opposed to being comparative to others in the industry.
Yeah. Such a good point. So I've got, so I run a private equity backed business and I have a few friends that do as well. And generally, the unlock is finding a way to replace yourself in your own business, which is kind of what we're talking about. So it all comes down to if you put aside my daily job, I guess, which is to really run the M&A function, right, which is to grow through acquisition. It is all about org dev, like organizational development, which is, at one size business, maybe when you're single location, single state, the 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 org chart it looks one way. Well, then
Mm,
you create chaos by buying, five others in four different states. It looks very different, different revenue size, geographic coverage area. So you have to create like the seats, the org chart for that
mhm.
organization, and then we're starting to sound corporatey, right? Add a layer of middle management. Call it
Right.
whatever you want. And so there's no playbook for this. But the answer is the same for you and for me, which is essentially people.
And actually, it's an interesting. I hadn't thought about this before we did this recording, but I have noticed that there's a brand of searcher that does not actually like their people very much, right? Like not to like throw people
What
under
do
the
you mean
bus,
by
but
that?
like that,
What do you mean not
like I
like that? Not respect or not
no, they
enjoy
respect
or
them, but they don't enjoy, or how do I say this? Like the people management element of the business is one of their least favorite parts. And to be clear, like it is one of the hardest parts. That's a given.
universally the hardest?
Yeah, that's not. But like, I feel like I get a lot of fulfillment from that side of the business, right? Like when I see, like if I have a hard conversation with somebody, and then a year later they're actually much better, like that's really cool and like enjoyable to me or fulfilling. Um, but, like, if it doesn't and I have to let them go, like, that's just hard, and that's a bummer. So, like, that's just the reality of it, but, like, I think one of the common refrains I see from prospective searchers who are pretty early in their search generally is like, "Hey, like, I I wanna run a business that I can put a manager in, so, like, I don't really have to interact with the team that much," right? Like, they don't wanna deal with sort of the day-to-day team personnel management issues. And to me, like the longer I've gotten into this, the more that's felt like that's the whole thing, right? Like that's what the business is.
It's a huge red flag, right?
Yeah,
If you're getting into SMB because it feels like a chance to go run like a mini LBO for yourself and make a wealth event,
right.
that's probably the wrong reason.
And related to that, like I think we generally vastly undervalue EQ versus IQ in search, right? Like if you are strong in building relationships, if you're strong at reading the room, if you're strong at kind of understanding other people's motivations and desires and interests, like if you're just like a high empathy person, like that will make you so much better as a people manager, right? And so it's this weird dynamic where like having super high drive and super high kind of like just like raw intellect or whatever you want to call it, like that might help you in year one to like get through the transition or maybe year two. But then like year two, three, four, five, like you need to become a high EQ leader, right? Because you're not actually doing the work as much anymore. So like that's what really matters is like, are you able to really empathize with your team and understand what's happening?
Yeah, it's almost like the magic of owning small business from a financial perspective is like organic revenue growth, right? And um, it doesn't just happen. One of the things that drives it is, reputation in the industry, in your local market for you as a service provider. But
Yep.
so too is the reputation of you as an owner and as an employer and a place to go work. And if you can become a place where your team wants to work there forever and follow
Mhm,
you forever, you are going to suck in talent without really trying to. And
mhm,
that's magical.
totally, and especially if it's cultural, right? Like, I think part of what I'm trying to do is build the place people wanna work, and not because I'm the owner, right?
Yes.
Like, it can't hinge on me either, right? Because then I'm just continuing to build an owner-dependent business. It's
Right.
more of, like, the systems, the processes, and the culture, the way the guys think about their job, the way they talk about the business. It's, like, so endemic to who we are that it's unrelated if I'm the owner or if I'm the, like, day-to-day CEO or not, right? That's, I think, like, the holy grail here, which we've got a ways to go, obviously. Like, right now, it's really important that I show up every day and I reinforce the message because I believe it and I'm the owner. But over time, I would love to see that sort of filter down all the way.
Absolutely.
So the tactical thing, which is sort of related, is I wanted to talk a little bit about building vendor relationships and supplier relationships, um, which for us, that has been a bigger part of my role than I anticipated, I think, going into it around, especially I mean, honestly, like mechanics, like for us is a huge one, like building out a whole network of mechanics, who's good at what, and also like sort of being a client they want to service and like being a client they're excited to work on their trucks, which helps you get your trucks back faster. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, like building vendor relationship side.
Well, let me just also level set. So, who do you think of as your vendors, right? Is it just mechanics? You don't have costs of goods sold, so to speak, other than
Yeah, our
labor.
vendors are basically we have some tree supply folks that
Okay.
are sort of selling, like consumable, but mostly like ropes, harness, like chains, like chainsaws, hand saws, all that type of stuff. And then yeah, primarily equipment dealers or like kind of rental shops or mechanics.
Got it. All right. So sorry, back up. What were you trying to get
Yeah.
to on the tactical front?
Basically, what you could do to build strong vendor relationships in as a business owner.
Oh man. Well, stepping back, if you're a vendor, you are really trying to act and be a partner with your customers, right? So a vendor and a customer are tied at the hip. And so I think being a good customer of a vendor is all of the things that are more than just paying on time. I think like sharing your message, sharing your vision of your business with your vendors can be something that can be worthwhile. For us in the fence business, that's a huge thing we do. It's also because, we need our vendors to follow us around the country to be successful. And so to like share with them our vision, our annual goals, our quarterly rocks in a way, we don't get that granular, but that way like they can believe that it's worth investing in us. It's worth the service component, for us like getting material to the right job site on time, accurately compared to the order spec is it is so important to our servicing our customer that um like it's not just about price. So I think maybe a lot of us get into this and we're just like, yeah, we're going to do whatever we have to do to get the best price from our vendors. And I think that's super short-sighted.
Totally. I mean, I'll give one example of how knowing vendors and understanding vendors can make a difference. Where we had a chipper with a mechanical issue. I sent it to a shop. They looked at it and then they were like, "Hey, we can't figure this out. We got to open it up. It's going to be 10 hours of shop labor just to open it up, at like $200 a pop, or an hour or whatever, or
Yeah.
$120 an hour." And so I called the former owner of my business because this was in the first year of ownership. And I was like, "Hey, like, what do you think about this? Like, this seems wild, right? That we're going to spend like $1,200 just to try to figure out what the issue is." And he said, "Hey, send it to this other shop in Portland." And I'm like, "What do you mean? I'm not going to send this chipper to Portland. Like, we're in Seattle." And he's like, "Trust me, like those guys really know this stuff." And so I paid a guy. I found this like online marketplace for finding towing people. So I
Yeah.
paid a dude with like a F-350, like $350 to tow it to Portland to that shop. Next day, the shop calls me and they're like, "Hey, like we figured out the issue. It's actually still under warranty, so we can get it solved with the dealer."
Oh,
And like it was done in 2 days. The same guy, he was still down in Portland, so he towed it back. And like it was done, and literally nothing out of pocket other than the tow cost. And it was one of those moments like, oh man, knowing your vendor, like it makes that's what like the former owners, like whatever, 20 plus years of owner or 15 plus years of ownership, like that's part of the stuff.
you mean the relationship that you couldn't have leveraged if yes. Yes, hugely
Um,
valuable.
Yeah, and so that was one thought I had. The other thought I had was, um, is really that point around articulating your vision to the vendor, right? Where, like I said, we just changed out our CRM provider, and a big part of that was sort of when we were talking to the new CRM provider, which is a relatively small kind of vertical SaaS, tree care only type of software
Yep.
provider,
Yep.
saying to them like, "Hey, like we want to be partners with you because we're going to grow, and that means like we want you to come along with us and like grow with us." And they were pretty game for it. And so just like every software product, there's all sorts of random issues we were running into, but like we have a pretty ongoing dialogue with them now of like, "Hey, we need this software fixed. This is why." Like I'll send them Loom videos, or Flavia, our ops manager, will send them things, and like they have to fit us into their own production schedule, development timeline, and whatnot, but they're pretty responsive too. And like that to me is like, okay, like we couldn't do that with HubSpot, right?
Yeah, they would
Um, and
never pick
and
up
so
your call.
they never pick up the phone, right? Exactly. And so that's where I'm like, okay, cool. Like we're asking them to make some adjustments to how travel time is calculated because I think it's being done wrong. Like the math isn't quite right.
Yeah.
And like so like I had a conversation with their product guy and like we talked about it and like he sent back a couple of mock-ups of like, okay, like I think this was gonna work better. And I was like, yep, that looks great. And like now they're working on it. Right. And like that's a vendor relationship. That's a partnership.
And a really good time to do that could be not your specific example, but do you remember the first couple weeks after you closed on Blooma? Uh, you essentially have to change ownership, so to speak. If you do an asset purchase, it's
Yep.
essentially a brand new entity, FEIN, everything, but with all the branding and goodwill of the business you bought, the old co. And so what we've gotten into a rhythm with doing is essentially taking like a closing checklist and like turning it into like a transition checklist. And a big part of that is when you have to transfer over all your accounts, right? Vendors broadly defined, your bank
Hmm.
accounts, everything from check scanning hardware, banking software, CRM, accounting software, on and on and on and on, social media accounts. It's a really good time as the owner. You're new and likely the seller is still around to
Hmm.
kind of get on the phone or get on the horn with all of those vendors broadly defined and just start building that relationship on day one.
Totally. No, and this is a kind of one of the more random tips I have, and we can maybe close with this. But I had to do vehicle inspections before I closed right on Blooma. I wanted a mechanic to go through all the trucks and chippers and whatnot,
Yeah.
and so I talked to the sellers about it, and we agreed that I could call basically the local dealer, and I called back their sales guy there, and I was like, look, like this is what's happening. Like the sellers gave me the blessing to do this.
Yeah.
Like I am going to grow this business and buy stuff from you in the future. Can we partner up on this? And like they did good equipment inspections for me for free. They came out. The sales guy used to be a mechanic there, so he knew he'd actually worked on those trucks before. So like he came out. I met with him at the yard. We went through item by item. He kind of gave me a little explanation of each one. He gave me a valuation estimate for each one because he's also the sales guy.
Yeah.
And that was like such an easy one where it's like, oh, this is a real win-win because he's excited that like, hey, this is a good customer, but now the customer is owned by somebody who wants to grow. Like that's great for them. And so that was something we did pre-closing, if the seller agrees, obviously.
It's a shame that we're like almost an hour in here and we gave
Yeah.
a really good piece of information, which is how many of us try to go get an asset appraisal, equipment appraisal, FF&E, whatever, valuation done, inspection prior to close and have no idea where to go.
It's a core issue. Yeah.
For every one of these sort of old school
Yeah.
blue collar service businesses.